My brother-in-law tried to kiss me after a family dinner when everyone was asleep. I refused, but now I don't know whether to tell my sister or pretend it never happened. Hello everyone, I never imagined I'd find myself in this situation, torn between protecting my sister and keeping a secret that weighs on me like a stone. My sister, Emma, has always been my closest confidant. We grew up side by side, sharing everything from clothes to childhood secrets. She's the kind of person who lights up a room, who believes in love with her whole heart. So when she met David, I wanted to believe in him too. David was charming from the start. He knew how to make people laugh, how to ease into any conversation, how to make you feel like you were the most important person in the room when he spoke to you. Emma was smitten, and honestly, I could see why. He had this effortless charisma, the kind that makes you feel safe. But looking back, I wonder if I ignored the little things, the lingering eye contact, the way his jokes sometimes had an edge to them when he spoke to me, the casual touches that I brushed off as harmless. Still, I never thought he would cross the line. Not until that night. It was a Saturday, and Emma had invited the family over for dinner. A cozy get-together, nothing out of the ordinary. Their home always felt warm, welcoming, the kind of place where you could let your guard down. My parents were there, laughing over glasses of wine, and Emma, glowing as she always did when she hosted, flitted between the kitchen and the dining table, making sure everyone had enough to eat. David was the perfect host too, grilling the steaks, pouring the drinks, making sure the conversation never hit a lull. To anyone else, it was a perfect evening. But now, replaying everything in my mind, I see the way his eyes lingered on me a little too long when he passed me a drink, how he leaned in just a little too close when he spoke. At the time, I told myself I was imagining it. That it was nothing. The night stretched on, and one by one, people started heading to bed. My parents had left earlier, and Emma, exhausted from hosting, kissed David goodnight before going upstairs. I was staying over in the guest room, and as I stood in the kitchen rinsing my wine glass, I heard his footsteps behind me. Still awake. His voice was low, casual. I nodded, forcing a small smile. Yeah, just cleaning up a bit. I expected him to say goodnight and head upstairs. Instead, he leaned against the counter, watching me in a way that made my stomach twist. You know, I've always admired you, he said suddenly. His tone was different, heavier. I let out a nervous laugh, brushing it off. That's nice of you to say. But he didn't drop it. He took a step closer. Too close. You're different from Emma, he continued, his voice quieter now, like this was something secret between us. There's something about you. My body tensed. David, it's late. You should go to bed. I turned to walk past him, but he blocked my path. My pulse pounded in my ears. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. Then, he reached out, his fingers grazing my arm, his eyes locked onto mine. And before I could process what was happening, he leaned in. Panic shot through me like ice. I stepped back, heart hammering. What the hell are you doing? My voice came out sharp, stronger than I felt. David froze, his face shifting between shock and something else, something almost amused. Relax, he said, lifting his hands like it was all just some misunderstanding. I misread things. Like this was my fault. I shook my head, my breath shaky. I'm going to bed. Without another word, I turned and walked away, locking the guest room door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced, replaying every moment, every detail. Should I wake Emma up and tell her? Should I pretend this never happened? What if this wasn't the first time he's done something like this? Morning came, and when I stepped out of the guest room, David was already in the kitchen, making coffee like nothing had happened. When he saw me, he smirked slightly, so brief I almost thought I imagined it. But I knew what I saw. Emma walked in moments later, kissed him on the cheek, and smiled at me like everything was normal. And I stood there, stomach churning, wondering if I should shatter her world or keep the secret that was now mine to bear. Morning came too soon. I hadn't slept, not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face too close to mine, felt the weight of his presence pressing in on me. My skin still burned where his fingers had brushed my arm, like a stain I couldn't scrub off. I'd spent hours staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning between options, none of which felt right. Telling Emma would destroy her. Keeping quiet would destroy me. I heard voices downstairs, Emma's light laughter, the clink of coffee cups. Normalcy. As if last night hadn't happened. As if I hadn't spent the night locked in the guest room, my heart pounding, listening for footsteps outside my door. When I finally forced myself to go downstairs, I found them in the kitchen. Emma stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, humming to herself. David was at the counter, sipping his coffee like he hadn't crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Then he looked up and met my eyes. For a split second, something flickered there, something unreadable, something smug. He knew I wouldn't say anything. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "Morning," he said, his voice light, easy. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "Morning." Emma turned and beamed at me. "I was just telling David how nice it was to have you over. You should stay more often." David smirked over his coffee cup. I forced a smile. "Yeah, maybe." Every second I stayed in that kitchen felt like suffocation. My body was screaming at me to run, to get out of that house, to put as much distance between myself and David as possible. But Emma, my sweet, trusting sister, was completely unaware. She had no idea that the man she loved, the man she married, the man she trusted with her whole heart, had tried to kiss her sister while she was asleep upstairs. I barely ate. I barely spoke. I just sat there, counting the minutes until I could leave. When I finally got in my car, my hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. The moment I pulled out of their driveway, I felt like I could breathe again. But the relief didn't last long, because now I had to decide what to do next. For the next few days, I avoided Emma's calls. I told myself I needed time to think, to process, to figure out my next move. But the truth was, I couldn't bear to hear her voice. The guilt was already eating me alive. But Emma was persistent. By the fourth missed call, she left a voicemail. "Hey, everything okay? You've been quiet. Call me when you can." I stared at my phone, my stomach twisting. She sounded worried. She loved me. And here I was, keeping the biggest secret of her life from her. I needed to talk to someone. Anyone. I called my best friend, Lisa. The moment she picked up, I broke. I told her everything, every detail, every second of that night. By the time I finished, my voice was shaking, my throat raw. Lisa was silent for a long time. Then she exhaled sharply. "That piece of shit." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "If I tell her, it'll ruin her life." "But if I don't," my voice cracked. "What if he does this to someone else?" "Emma deserves to know," Lisa said firmly. "You know that." I did. But knowing and doing were two different things. "Do you think she'll believe me?" I whispered. Lisa hesitated. "I want to say yes. But you know how people are when they love someone. They don't always see the truth right away." That was what I was afraid of. That Emma wouldn't believe me. That she'd think I misread things, just like David had said. That she'd look at me differently, like I was trying to destroy her happiness. I thanked Lisa and hung up, but I was no closer to a decision. For the next few days, I carried the secret like a weight chained around my neck. I barely slept. Every time my phone buzzed with Emma's name, my chest tightened. I started avoiding family gatherings, making up excuses, anything to keep my distance from David. But then Emma showed up at my apartment. I opened the door to see her standing there, concern written all over her face. "Are you mad at me?" she asked. Guilt punched through me. "Of course not. Then why have you been avoiding me?" She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "You've barely spoken to me since you stayed over. Did something happen?" The question hit me like a slap. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. This was it. My chance. The moment I should tell her. But then I pictured her face crumbling. Pictured her defending him, telling me I must have misunderstood. Pictured her crying, breaking, losing the life she had built with him. So I did the one thing I swore I wouldn't do. I lied. "No," I said, forcing a smile. "I've just been busy with work." Emma searched my face, her eyes full of doubt. Are you sure? I nodded. Yeah. I promise. She sighed, then pulled me into a hug. I just miss you. I hugged her back, and for the first time in my life, I felt like a terrible sister. Because I knew the truth. And I was keeping it from her. But as I stood there, feeling Emma's arms around me, I made a silent promise. I would find a way to tell her. I had to. I just didn't know how. I thought lying would make things easier, that it would buy me time to figure out how to tell her without shattering everything. But the moment the words left my mouth, the moment I saw the relief in Emma's eyes as she hugged me and believed me, I knew I had only made things worse. Because now, I wasn't just carrying the weight of what happened, I was actively hiding it, pretending it didn't exist, letting her live in blissful ignorance while I walked around feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of the truth. And David knew. He knew I hadn't told her. I could feel it in the way he carried himself the next time I saw them, at our parents' house a week later. He was relaxed, confident, the same effortless charmer he always was, slipping seamlessly into conversation, making Emma laugh, helping my mom set the table like he was the perfect son-in-law. But every so often, I would catch him looking at me, a flicker of something in his eyes that made my skin crawl. Not fear. Not guilt. Amusement. Like this was a game to him, like he was daring me to say something, knowing I wouldn't. And that's what terrified me the most, not just what he had done, but how easy it was for him to pretend nothing had happened. I couldn't eat. Every bite of food felt like it would choke me. Every second I sat there, listening to Emma talk about how lucky she was to have him, felt like I was betraying her over and over again. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her hand and tell her everything, force her to see what I saw, make her understand that the man she trusted was not who she thought he was. But the words wouldn't come. Because what if she didn't believe me? What if she thought I was lying, or worse, that I had somehow led him on? The fear of losing her, of making everything worse, kept my mouth shut. When dinner ended, I avoided him as best as I could, but he cornered me in the hallway as I grabbed my coat, standing just a little too close, speaking just a little too softly. I was starting to think you might say something, he murmured, his voice light, almost teasing, like we were sharing some kind of inside joke. My hands clenched into fists. I wanted to slap the smirk off his face, wanted to scream at him, but instead, I forced myself to step back, to put space between us, because if I let my anger take over, I knew it would only make things worse. I whispered back, my voice shaking. I still might. His smirk didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. But you won't. I hated that he was right. I left without saying goodbye to Emma. I couldn't look at her, not while I felt like this. The whole drive home, my mind raced. I kept thinking about what Lisa had said, about how Emma deserved to know. But every time I pictured the moment, it played out the same way. Emma crying. Emma doubting me. Emma choosing him. And the worst part? I couldn't even blame her. He was her husband. She loved him. And love, real or not, had a way of making people blind. Days passed. I avoided Emma's calls again, but this time, she didn't let it go. One night, she showed up at my apartment unannounced, just like before. But this time, she didn't look concerned. She looked hurt. What is going on with you? She asked the second I opened the door. First, you disappear after staying over, then you barely speak to me at dinner, and now you're just ignoring me completely? Did I do something? My chest tightened. No, of course not. Then what? She pressed, stepping inside. Because this isn't like you. I wanted to tell her. God, I wanted to tell her. But fear had its claws in me, sinking deep, keeping the words locked behind my teeth. And she saw it. Her eyes searched mine, and for the first time, I think she realized I was hiding something. Is it David? She asked, her voice quieter now, like she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I opened my mouth, then closed it. The hesitation was enough. I watched as something in her face shifted, worry, doubt, confusion, all tangled together. She swallowed. Did something happen? This was my moment. This was the moment to finally tell her the truth. But the words still felt impossible. I hesitated for too long. She sighed, rubbing her forehead. I don't understand what's going on, but if you're upset with him, just tell me. I can't, I whispered. Her expression tightened. Why not? Because it will break you. Because you'll hate me for it. Because I don't know if you'll even believe me. But I couldn't say any of that. So I just stood there, silent, watching the distance grow between us, feeling the moment slip away. And then she shook her head, hurt flickering across her face. I don't know what's going on with you, but I can't keep guessing. She stepped back, her voice quieter now. If you ever decide to actually talk to me, you know where to find me. Then she was gone. And I was alone. I sank onto the couch, my whole body shaking, because I had just lost the one chance I had to tell her. And maybe that was what David had counted on all along. Not that I wouldn't want to tell her, but that when it came down to it, I wouldn't know how. That fear would win. That silence would win. And maybe, in the end, it did. Because I never told her. Weeks passed, then months. I forced myself to see her again, to pretend nothing had changed, to act like everything was fine. David still smirked at me in that way that made my skin crawl, still played the role of the devoted husband, still walked around like he had never done anything wrong. And Emma was still happy, still oblivious. And I couldn't bring myself to take that from her, no matter how much it killed me inside. Maybe one day, she'll see it on her own. Maybe one day, the perfect image she has of him will crack, and she'll realize the truth. But until then, I live with the secret. And I don't know if that makes me a coward or just someone who loves her sister too much to be the one to break her heart.